Hey guys, I'm George Lovesy. I'm a concept artist at Grinding Gear Games. I've actually changed up what this talk's going to be a little bit. So I know it says storytelling through concept art, but it's going to be more about how to basically overcome creative problem solving when you have artist block. So the new title should look something a little bit more like this. This is kind of all over the show, so I'm going to be switching between slides quite a lot. If you have any questions or anything's unclear, feel free to ask. Like, you can ask whenever, it's not a big deal. So basically, I'm a concept artist. I've been working at Grinding Gear Games for about 4 years now, which basically means I just draw cool shit for video games. Is there anyone in the room that is an artist that like I already don't know or is wanting to be a concept artist? All right, cool. Sure. Okay, cool. Well, this should help you guys out. Part of being a concept artist on Path of Exile means we have to draw a lot of repetitive stuff. It sounds really cool in theory, but when you come to drawing like a sword 100 times in a row, it can become really tedious in coming up with new ideas. Once you get that artist block and it kicks in, it can be really hard to get out of. And once you've got that, your boss isn't going to be too happy when you stop being productive. So I'm going to offer you guys a few ways to basically avoid that and stay productive even though you're not feeling it. I know a lot of the time when you're painting or drawing, it can flow out of you, but a lot of times it won't. So in order to stay productive, how do we avoid this? We need to come up with a coping method. So basically, the first thing we need to take into consideration is the fact that there's no such thing as an original idea. Most ideas are derived from something, and they all develop from something. So if you're sitting down to come up with a concept that your boss has given you, whatever the brief may be, it might be pretty hard to come up with something straight out of the top of your head. So it's a good idea to embrace the idea that a generic idea or a generic concept might be the best starting point. Everything that becomes original starts as something like that. It's basically like a tree where you start at the bottom, and the further up that you go and the more branches you go down, the more original it becomes and the more yours it becomes. So embracing stereotypes is a good way to start. But the first thing you need to do when embracing those stereotypes is understand the boundaries of your game. Now, I can only go based on what we do at Path of Exile. So I'm going to discuss a few of the themes that we use and a few of the iconography that we use, and then explain how using those and breaking those down can help come up with new concepts, even if we've done them a lot of times before. So the first few themes that we use are iconic, type design, broad design, and hybrid iconic. These are terms that I've coined myself, so they're not like super professional or anything, but just take me at my word on it. So first of all, iconic. I think a lot of us know what iconic design is. It's design that's instantly recognizable. It's design that uses really big shapes, basic colors and stuff like that. Examples of that can be like Sonic the Hedgehog or Super Mario, but it can also be used in more realistic designs like Kratos or any of the Assassin's Creed characters, mainly being like the hood that they have. It can be the hood, but it's also the fact that the hood has like the beak on it, which makes it unique. You instantly recognize it. An example of this is, I can show you an example of something that I've done that I thought was an iconic design versus something that might be a broad design. This is something that I painted about 4 years ago. This image here I consider to be iconic just for the fact that without the wings and without the halo surrounding it, that whole design would fall apart. There's no real functionality to it apart from the fact that it was made to try and look badass, but at the same time, it doesn't really make much sense. It's just some weird disproportioned chick that flies around with gigantic guns. But that doesn't stop it being good and iconic in that sense, even though it isn't functional. So iconic design is used a lot in Path of Exile, especially when we use it on villains and some weaponry. We actually don't use it too much on our main characters because our main characters look basically like whatever you pick up in the game is how your character will look, which is also where we use iconic design in our microtransactions, but the actual base character itself is really stereotypical and really broad. So that's an example of iconic design. The next one we use is broad design. Now, broad is basically, it might sound boring, but it's actually really important. This broad design is the thing that you use on characters that fill out the game. Specifically right now, I'm talking about games like Path of Exile, massive multiplayer online games, things where you have to have a lot of NPCs. So in broad design, nothing stands out. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's uninteresting. So broad design characters are things that look like they should be part of the world. They can be anything from vehicles to buildings to weaponry, etc. When do we use it in PoE? We actually use broad design quite a lot when we're designing weapons that might be put in game. Because they're not parts of whole armor sets, they're actually not too iconic looking. And you can't have everything in game looking like it's over the top. Otherwise, it just dulls out the whole effect of something when you make it iconic. So you need these broad designs to balance out iconic works. On a side note, iconic games tend to be used more for children and also like mobile games because of the format that you're using. It makes it a lot smaller, so these icons need to be more easily readable. But in games that are basically AAA or next generation or whatever, it's okay to only use like a few of these things to basically amplify or establish something that you want to be rememberable in the game. So when do we use it in Path of Exile? We actually sell a lot of microtransactions that are iconic, but I've also come up with some microtransactions that we put on our characters that are broad design as well. So these things are more toned down. They're not instantly recognizable, but also because we have so many iconic designs in game at the moment, a lot of players wanted to get something that wasn't as kind of like out there and flashy and showy. So we came up with a thing called the Wasteland Armor Set, which is this here. As you can see, it's kind of broad. Like there's no one feature of the whole design, unlike the winged fairy thing that I showed you before that actually stands out. You could probably take a few things away from the design and it wouldn't make much of an impact, whereas if you took away like just the wings on that fairy, it would make a massive impact on the overall image. So we put that out into the community and they ended up liking it quite a bit just for the fact that it was so opposite to what we normally put out, which might be massive demon armor sets or crazy fire wings or like something like that. I've also got an example of what it ended up looking like in game. So this is how the 3D model turned out. And you can see that it's quite subtle. It's not going to stand out too much against the background. And it's something that a lot of characters and people actually quite liked about the idea. It basically makes the character fit in more with the world rather than stand out from the world. I guess it kind of depends on what build the people that play our game are wanting to go for. Not everyone wants something giant and flashy, which is something that took me a long time to kind of understand, because I think that when you become a concept artist, you just want to draw the guy with the big sword or whatever. So it needs to be, yeah. So the next thing is hybrid iconic. So this basically covers like all aspects. Hybrid iconic is something that I like to say that most games use. It's kind of a mix between taking iconic parts of a design and also adding them to characters with broad designs so that everything feels inclusive. A good example of this is Destiny. Destiny uses a lot of hybrid iconic designs. If you look at their characters, you know that they're instantly Destiny, and you know that they're iconic looking, but also no one character out kind of shines any other character in the game when you're in it. They all look like they're supposed to be there, so it makes them broad, but you still know that it's Destiny. And iconic hybrids are really good for establishing kind of IPs. A lot of companies use that. A lot of the time we use it in Path of Exile when we're doing things like mini bosses. So they might share traits of, say, the big boss that they're about to fight, but they're not quite as over the top as that boss, so you know you're leading up to it. Also, a lot of bosses in Path of Exile actually dictate the look and the area of the minions and the place that they're in. So when we're coming to new expansions, a lot of the time we'll design the boss first and then base an area around it. At least we've done it a few times before, which can always be fun because it means that you can really heavily theme up like what you're going to do. I've got an example of hybrid iconic design here. So this is one of the boss characters that I designed. It's not entirely a functional character. It was something that we released maybe a few expansions ago. I think that might have been the last expansion, actually. As you can see, the armor set isn't actually functional. It's more supposed to be ceremonial, but there are a few elements of it that are iconic, like the helmet. And for anyone that's played Overwatch, can like tell that it's pretty like, not a bite, but I was designing this at the same time that that game came out, and then I saw that and was like, oh shit. So parts of this that are iconic are the fact that it's got really basic color schemes. So basically the gold and the red and the helmet. So if you took the helmet away, it'd be less iconic, but any part of the other armor that you took away, it wouldn't really matter. So that's a good example of like hybrid iconic, but it also has a lot of design work that can relate over to other characters. So maybe the interior patterns on the armor and also the shape definitions of the helmet can be carried over to a lot of weapons and swords that, say, the minions that you fight before you get to this character could have. So once you've established what kind of like classes of like iconic design and broad design your game uses, how do you put those into effect when you have artist block? So once you understand that, you can basically go forward and say your boss has given you something and you, no matter what you draw, you can't figure out for the life of you how to make it interesting, how to make it good. What do you do? So I've come up with a coping mechanism that I like to use, and I call it theme compacting. It's basically taking the idea that you can take a generic design, something boring, which is the whole point about starting off basic, starting off generic, and then building upon that to make something interesting. So theme compacting is basically the idea that you can add a theme to anything. So if you take, say, a normal like European armor set and then add a theme to it, it instantly makes it more interesting and it has more storytelling behind it. The compacting side comes from when you then take that theme again and add another theme to it to make it even more derived. So you're basically going further up the tree and out onto another branch to see how far you can take it. Themes can be anything. It can be anything from culture to materials to animals. Animals is a really good theme to use, especially since you can use animal shapes in armor sets to make them look more stylized, which is a good way to kind of separate things apart. I know that's been overdone quite a bit, but if you do it correctly, it shouldn't really matter. Theme can apply to either shape or pattern, so it can be either the thing inside the silhouette of the armor or the actual silhouette itself. I've got an example of some swords that we designed, or I designed, that were items that follow this idea. So when it comes to swords, it's pretty obvious like what is a sword and what isn't. So when you've done like 1,000 of these, which is kind of like what you get to when you've been working on PoE for like 4 years, you still need to keep making these things unique. So quite often we get supporter players buying packs and they get to design their own weapons. And I think pretty much all of these, bar one, is based on a supporter giving me information about what they want and me trying to make it unique enough that it looks awesome in game, but also fits in with the PoE style. So for the first one, the theme that I used was, I think that was actually the one where it was going in game as part of an expansion. And the expansion, the main boss was called the Shaper, and he was themed around space and kind of like void bringing and stuff. So I based the whole sword around chaos, which was the element in the game that it was using when you attacked, but also the idea of space and black holes, which is why you get the black hole on it. Further down, like the crystal, other purple one as well, it was supposed to be based in the fact that this person wanted a crystal sword, but this crystal sword also gave off chaos damage, so I made it so it looked shattered and quite shard-like, but also made it purple. We did the same thing with the blue sword in the middle. They wanted something that was like kind of water-based but had quite tribalistic designs on it. So it's easy to kind of take those ideas and run with them. And it shows just how theming something up can change how a sword looks dramatically or how any concept can look. So when I was thinking about this talk, I came up with an idea that I would do a painting for it using these ideas of theme compacting and seeing how it could work in an initial concept. The painting I did is in no way the final works of what you might do, but it's definitely something that you could send off to your boss and have him give you feedback about. So this is what I ended up coming up with. So ignore the butterflies for now, because I just did that because I thought it was lols that a warrior was going to be summoning butterflies. The idea behind this was that I gave myself a brief that I had to create a mini boss for the game. It had to be a hybrid stylized character. So it basically had to look semi-iconic, but also be able to fit into the world. So it wasn't a big boss, but it should have shared traits of what the big boss might have. It had to fall roughly in the Path of Exile style, which is dark and gritty, which I think it kind of did. There could be some other things that can change up, but I think it fits pretty well in the world. I had to start with a generic European armor base, which is pretty much just plate armor that is made out of metal, so, you know. And I also wanted it to be some sort of warrior, but also a hybrid of being like a shaman. So how I went about this was I took a bunch of reference, which I think is like the first thing you should do no matter what if you're coming up with a concept. For the shaman side of things, I added all the drapery around the legs, which I thought is like pretty typical of like a European wizard or whatever you see in like low-key fantasy, like Lord of the Rings or something like that. But I also added the headset. It's obviously not functional. It follows the Roman armor style of like the armor plating coming down here, but it's also got like the headrest that comes like out like that, which is supposed to reflect native African like shaman type armors or type headwear, where that's like you can tell that the shaman is the person with the, you know, like big crazy stuff coming out that way. So this person was supposed to be basically not someone that fought on the front lines of like a battlefield, but somewhere in the back, basically summoning and throwing fireballs and stuff like that. When it came to compacting the interesting ideas, I took the generic design of, say, like a European armor set, and then added extra design within that design work to make it look more interesting. So what I did for this one was, once I'd actually designed the silhouettes and the overall look of what I was going for, I took basically, what's it called? Irish, like the Irish patterns that you get. I'm not too sure what they're called, but I incorporated those into the armor sets. And those already instantly added a layer of depth to what the history of this character might be. And it's a very quick and easy, simple step that you can use to basically add character depth and bring that character more to life about what their background is. I also reflected some of the shapes. So with the headset, I also reflected that half circular / triangle shape down near the crotch area that held together the two armor plates at his side, which I think is a good way to basically keep armors unified, or anything unified, is repeating the shapes throughout the design that you're making. I added the butterflies just for the fact that I thought it'd be funny to add symbolism of another theme and how drastically that can change up the theme of what you're doing. Because this whole design could work really well if, say, those butterflies were mini skulls flying out of his hand, but it just shows that how drastically the look of something can change up if you decide to go with the wrong symbolism. So it's an idea of basically making it wrong, but for the lols, so it doesn't really matter. So if you're running into issues when it comes to coming up with good concepts, I recommend you use that idea of basically taking a theme, adding it to something that you've done, and then compacting it again. It's basically adding layers of depth to what you've done and continually doing that until you come up with something that's good. Obviously, it's totally dependent on what brief you've been given by your art director. I mean, it makes no sense designing this kind of character if he's wanting like a little pony or some shit like that. I mean, you know, come on. So that's my kind of theory into it. Do we have any questions? No? Okay, well, that's pretty much it. So, oh, yeah.
So it's not a great question, but, you know, Zoom is amazing. It's great work, so much rich detail. But when implementing into the game, you transition from a 2D concept drawing to a 3D model, and like, I'm not an intuitive part of myself, but remember just how, like, in the end of the day, the character kind of takes up, you know, that's kind of the nature of isometric things. So do you feel like you might lose quite a bit of that?
Yeah, it's definitely something we have to take into account, especially with camera angle. As you can see, I kind of paid way less attention to the legs in this, and that was A, because I was lazy, but B, because it doesn't really matter. Because you're getting a top-down version, especially in Path of Exile, the top silhouette is the most important part, and it's the most recognizable thing of any character. Obviously, it kind of changes depending on like the angle and where it's running. The only way we can really tell is we normally draw top-down views as well, like three-quarter views, which are quite hard. But sometimes you can't even tell if a good design is going to translate until it's made into 3D. So it's kind of hit and miss. You kind of learn to calibrate based on designs that you've done before, what worked, what didn't. With this, I could tell instantly that if I'd handed this off to any of the 3D guys, they'd be like, make the shoulder plates way smaller, because that's just going to distort everything. Same with the legs. Like in PoE, we don't really have any drapery going past the knees unless it's a cape, because it just becomes too complicated with our game engine. But yeah, silhouette in that sense is really something we have to take into consideration. It's just hard because you don't really look at people three-quarter down, like, at least I'm pretty short, but I mean, I don't do that mostly in life, so it's kind of a weird angle to draw at, but I mean, it's definitely something we have to think about.
Are you quite in contact with 3D modeling people?
Yeah, we work right beside them. I think Severn might be in this room, he might not be. Oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, basically, a lot of the time when I come up with a concept, I'll hit up the 3D guy straight away and be like, bro, this looks cool, but is it going to work? And they can be like, nah. or they can be like, yeah, it should be sweet, or whatever. It happens a lot. Like, as a concept artist, you kind of get carried away with yourself quite a bit, just being like, I want to make the coolest thing ever, but is it feasible in game? Maybe not, so, yeah. Any other questions? Sweet, well, thanks for turning up and listening to me ramble on about armors and drawings and shit, so.